Good morning. Sorry, that was not as stable as I thought. Okay. All right, good morning. It is 10:44 a.m. Mountain Time on Sunday, December 18th, 2016. I'm Christiana Ellis, and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. So here I am in Colorado. It worked. Oh boy, my background's all blown out. No, that's no good. That's no good. Oh, fine. All right, well, if I just sit back, I suppose. This feels weird. Okay. Good morning. I made it to Colorado despite about 5.5 hours worth of travel delays, which isn't great, but certainly could have been a lot worse. I certainly encountered other people at the airport who had it a lot worse. But I'm not going to spend all video talking about that because it's time to talk about the next episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender in the rewatch. So this was episode 17, The Northern Air Temple. And there's a lot going on in this episode. It's interesting. So we have Aang and Katara and Sokka traveling, and they're listening to a storyteller. As they're moving north and they're, resting for the evening, and guys telling the stories of the people who walk on the air. And Aang his heart is warmed because he's thinking, oh, they're telling stories of the airbenders that used to live here. And he's imagining that these are really old stories because the guy's talking about my grandpappy used to see him. But then he's like, but no, my grandpappy used to see him last week. And so he points to his grandpappy who's still around. So they decide to go to the Northern Air Temple because maybe there are some airbenders alive. Turns out that what there are is people who have kind of occupied and taken over the air temple, and they do gliders. And I'm not just going to summarize the video, but so Aang is, his first reaction is to be very disappointed, especially once he sees that they have taken over all sorts of spaces within the temple, and have been pretty kind of disrespectful of the original structure and the paintings and statues and so on as they build and improve the location. And the theme in the episode of wanting his history to be preserved and respected, which is not an unreasonable thing, but at the same time, we also have to remember, that as angry as Aang gets about this, he's also got to remember that from everybody else's perspective, this temple has just been abandoned, empty, uncared for, unused for decades and decades. And these refugees were able to build it into their home. And, it takes Aang a while to come around to that idea. Because, again, it's kind of just an element of not wanting things to change, but sometimes they change. And you kind of have to just be, at peace with that. If you're ever going to be at peace, you have to be at peace with that. And that's the sort of thing that could get political. But anyway, though, sorry, lost train of thought in that particular swamp. So part of what helps Aang to come around is when he is seeing people only just gliding using technology, so to speak, a glider, rather than through bending. He declares that they don't have the spirit that allows you to fly. But especially once he sees, I'm forgetting the character's name, but it's interesting that we have a disabled character where, other than a brief mention of how he lost the use of his legs, really doesn't matter at all in any other sense, and that's kind of cool. And he gets to fly around in his cool glider chair and be a cool guy. That's awesome. And you know, so, but seeing that and then seeing this way help Katara be able to experience flying in that way, is part of what kind of helps him come around and see that these are good people. But at the same time, then we discover the horrible secret, which is that this crazy inventor type who's been making all of these technology improvements and bonding with Sokka on inventing stuff and all of that, he's been secretly building weapons for the Fire Nation as the price of their continued presence there without the Fire Nation attacking them. And that's a tricky thing too, because on the one hand, you know, like even the kid is really angry and disappointed with his father, and of course, this is an example of, you know, like what price are you willing to pay for the safety of your loved ones? But what price might actually still be too high? And it's interesting, you know. So basically, Aang just draws the line pretty clearly, saying you can't keep doing this. And in fact, he doesn't even let the inventor, try to negotiate anything. He basically, as soon as the Fire Nation rep shows up, Aang just shows up and says, "Nope, go away. This isn't happening. Stop." And I couldn't help but think that the problem with that, Aang, is that not only, like, first of all, not only does it cause the big attack that happens in the fight, but it's also not clear at the end that they wouldn't just come back. They retreated for now, but does he really think that that's the sort of thing that the Fire Nation's just going to say, oh, well, I guess they get to keep it after all? Especially now that we know that the Avatar is there. And now that Aang might move on, but it's... The problem is that he's the one that wants to make a decision for everybody else. And we can understand why he wouldn't want the Fire Nation to keep getting these weapons, but he's also essentially making a decision without consulting these people that might well make them have to flee again. Could get some of them killed. That's a big decision, but it's also one that we're potentially going to see ramifications of. The flip side of it, with this war balloon. But it's also interesting, big action sequence, the big fight, in that this is the first time we've really seen fighting against a substantial number of Fire Nation, with bringing their big guns, so to speak, with these crawling tanks, and all that sort of thing, and having a huge number of people, and they benefit quite a bit from some good ideas like the war balloon, and being a very defensible position and having air power and all of that sort of thing, that they're able to defend against a much larger force. But as I said, it's also, I feel like as Aang and Katara and Sokka move on in this episode, it doesn't seem at all clear to me that the people staying behind at the Northern Air Temple are safe. In fact, they should probably run. They should take the opportunity to leave. But it wasn't made clear that that was going to happen. So it's complicated, and also complicated. Along with the stuff about Aang not wanting his Airbender history to be disrespected, but then also acknowledging nobody was using it. Is it still respected if it's just left untouched with no one ever using the space again? Is that respecting it? Interesting. So the fight's pretty cool, but I guess I don't have necessarily a lot to say about just the action of it. Um, you know, the other thing that was a little bit convenient was that the idea that this gigantic natural gas explosion, it creates a huge explosion with no obvious structural damage to the temple itself, and it makes all the bad guys go away with no collateral damage. That's fine. I thought in the long shot, remember seeing it the first time, that when we saw this explosion in long shot that we might see that the temple would start to fall or something, but anyway. None of this ambivalence is intended as criticism even, really. It's just more a matter of, this is a complex episode that's chewing on complex things that are not all intended to be resolved at this point. Because, of course, we get the big victory with the war balloon in this episode, but then, as we see, they have to ditch it, and it's recovered by the Fire Nation, who now presumably can reverse engineer it with the resources that they have as an army. That could come back to bite everybody, so we'll see how that goes, but yeah, so this is kind of, it's a traveling episode that could easily be mistaken as an episode of the week, but it's chewing on some tough meat, so to speak, in this episode, just that sort of thing. I like that there is, I like in some ways that there's not a neat resolution to it all, because, you know, even though you get the victory, it's complex in the ways that I already described, and it's not over. So, anyway, I think that'll do it for this time, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow for 5 more minutes.